Our top story, Ukraine, is getting closer to desperately needing some aid.
It's going to be getting some financial aid anyway. The International Monetary Fund has said that it'll be sending a team to Kiev to launch discussions about this desperately needed financial lifeline. The new Prime Minister says the government needs some $35 billion worth of international assistance. State reserves have already shrunk to less than $18 billion. Now, the US and EU have said that they'll together guarantee about $2.5 billion worth of loans. The IMF itself hasn't mentioned any specific amounts, but it says it is ready to respond to Kiev's needs. Here's the IMF spokesman.
We can work with transition governments, we can work with interim governments, and the issue for us is a government that is internationally recognized, and we have no reason to believe that the recognition is an issue in this case.
Let's move on to the markets now. European markets have just opened their trading day in green to start out the session, mostly continuing that Thursday rebound, which began on comments from the Federal Reserve Chief in the US about her plans to continue tapering stimulus measures there. A mixed picture on the Asian markets to end the trading week. During the session, we saw China's currency falling nearly 1% against the dollar, its biggest drop in years. The Nikkei closing down about 0.5%. This despite some pretty strong data coming out about Japan's economy. Factory output rose 4% in January, and core inflation rose 1.3%. There are still some concerns, though, about how the world's third largest economy is going to deal with a 3% tax hike that's expected to take effect this April.
Now, we've been talking a lot about François Hollande's African tour. His stop in Nigeria was intended to increase French investment in Africa's second largest economy.
Yeah, that's Nigeria, of course. But France is still lagging behind a lot of other countries in terms of its African investment outside of its former colonies. And as English-speaking countries take up more of Africa's GDP, France has some catching up to do. Oliver Farry explains.
This offshore oil platform owned by Total is the flagship of French investment in Nigeria. The oil giant has invested much in the Central African country, the most populous on the continent. But beyond the oil industry, few French companies have ventured into Nigeria's dynamic market. Africa expert Antoine Glaser says France is too focused on its former colonies.
There's a whole load of French companies in Ivory Coast, 500, 600, but only 20 large French companies in Nigeria.
And French-speaking Africa does not have much economic clout, constituting only 19% of Africa's GDP, while English-speaking countries make up almost half the continent's wealth. And it's getting bigger. Other than Nigeria, which boasts a robust growth of 7% per annum, there's spectacular growth too in Ghana, Uganda and Ethiopia. But Alexandre Villegrand, who represents French companies operating in Africa, says France remains a key player.
Of course, we're losing market share, but in terms of volume, we're progressing. You're better off having a quarter of a 3-foot wide apple pie than half of one that's 8 inches wide. It's a simple calculation.
François Hollande's speech in Abuja showed France was willing, but the reality is it has little money to grant companies wishing to set up in a country as hard to access as Nigeria.
OK, then, Kate, take us through some of the day's other business news, starting with a pretty daring computer hack.
Yeah, a British man's been charged with hacking into the computer system of the US Federal Reserve and disclosing the personal information of those who use it. Lori Love is also believed to have breached security at agencies including NASA and the FBI.
The city of Rome is facing bankruptcy after Italy's new Prime Minister withdrew an aid plan. It was meant to cover a budget shortfall of €860 million to ensure basic city services. The mayor is threatening to resign if he doesn't get the funds his city needs.
And an agreement's been reached to finish the stalled expansion of the Panama Canal. The European Consortium of Contractors and the Canal Authority will each inject $100 million to solve immediate cash flow problems. Work was halted for over 2 weeks as part of a long-running row after the contractors said the construction would cost $1.6 billion more than they'd originally predicted.
And lastly, a deal that sounds almost too good to be true, a transatlantic flight for just €10, Kate.
Yeah, that's what RyanAir wants to start offering, these sort of extraordinarily cheap tickets from Europe to the United States. The low-cost Irish-based airline says that if it can make money on €1 tickets within Europe, why not €10 to go a little further afield? Now, that bargain's not expected to become available for at least 5 years while the company gets the long-haul aircraft that it needs. And there is, of course, a catch. Passengers would have to pay extra for everything, from baggage to food and drink, as well as that unavoidable airport tax. There would also be a lot of premium and business class seats that would cost more than €10. So it would add up to a little more than that headline price. But I think it still sounds like a pretty good deal if it does indeed come to pass.
There's always a catch, Kate, as you say. OK, thanks very much for joining us. Now we move on to take a look at the headlines around the world. International